So before we get started on installing and configuring Phinx, we're going to pull down a fresh Slim project. We're going to take a look around it and we are going to set up our database using Eloquent. Now, if you are using PDO or anything else to work with your database in your own projects, it doesn't matter. The concept of the migrations is the same. I just happen to prefer using Laravel's database package. So let's go and pull down this example project I have. This is just literally some scaffolding for a Slim project, just so we don't have to recreate an entire structure. So I'll leave a link to this in the course links for you to go ahead and grab. So let's go ahead and call this Slim migrations and wait for this to pull down and we'll take a look around it. Okay, so that is all pulled down. Let's first of all go into this directory so we can start to run commands. And if we head over to our text editor, I'm just going to talk you through this example project. The first thing is we just have a standard public directory. So the first thing that we could do is come over to this public directory and we should just see hello from app here. Now, if we come over to our bootstrap file, there's a couple of things going on here. We're going ahead and loading in configuration from an environment file. This is where we're going to be adding our database details. That's very, very important, just so we can keep them separate from our code and we're not littering our code with any secure data. So now we're just going ahead and setting up a new Slim app. We have some config in here. Most of this doesn't matter for the purpose of this. And then we are also using views here, but again, we're not going to be focusing on that at all. So that is pretty much it in terms of our application. We also have that controller that we just saw in the browser. So all that's doing is just rendering out a view with our app name from our configuration. What we're interested in doing is replacing this out with grabbing a user from our database. So let's head over to our terminal and do a composer require on illuminate database. You might already be working with Eloquent, in which case this will be pretty straightforward. But if you're not, then this will give you a good chance to get a really nice ORM working with your database and models. Okay, so now that we've got this pulled in, what I typically do is over in Bootstrap, create a new file to boot everything up. So I'm going to call this database.php. And I'm going to go ahead and require this over in app just at the bottom down here. So we're going to go ahead and require in very simply database. So we can pretty much just boot everything up in there and make use of it. And in this case, just for the sake of clarity, let's just bring in our directory in there and do the following. So let's now head over to env and set some environment variables here for our database connection details. Of course, to actually migrate things, we are going to need some configuration in there that we can tell Phinx what to use. So in this case, we're going to have a database driver. We're going to have a database host, and the driver is going to be, in this case, something like MySQL. We're going to have a port, and we'll also have of course, database itself, and a username and a password. And this will allow us to connect not only within our application, but we can also use these same configuration details for our migrations as well. So let's fill these in. In this case, for me, it's just on my local machine, and we have 3306 for the port. We have a database called project, so we're going to need to go ahead and create that. And for me, the username and password are just root. So if you're not familiar with environment variables, these are just going to be available now in our environment when we run our project. And in this case, what we can do is now pull in not the explicit values within our code. We can pretty much just pull in using the native getEnv function within PHP. So for this, we want to set these up and say getEnv, and we just use the key that we gave over in our env file. And we pull this down and pretty much do the same thing for our host, our port, our database username and password. So database username, and of course our password. So let's just go ahead and switch these over. So we have our host, our port, our database, and username and password. Okay, so now that we have these settings in here, let's come over to our database.php file. The first thing we're going to do is pull in our config from our container. So we're going to head over and grab settings, database. So that's all that information that we grabbed a minute ago. Just for the kind of purpose of checking this out, let's dump config just so we can see all of that information in there. And you can see we do have all of them values pulled from our env file into our configuration, and we have these available to start connecting up. So to boot Eloquent up, we create a new illuminate database capsule manager instance, like so. And we go ahead and add a connection. So we say capsule, add connection. And in this case, what we ideally want to do is just pass all of our config in, but this requires 2 additional things to be set. So what we're going to do is an array merge on config, and as the second array that we want to merge in, we are going to set the character encoding here to UTF-8, and we're going to set the collation in here to UTF-8 Unicode CI. So we have our connection pretty much in there. We can now use Capsule to boot up Eloquent, and we can use Capsule to set this as global. Now what's going to happen now is we can head over to app, create a models directory, and inside of here we should have some kind of user model. We go ahead and create this out now. So class user. Let's go ahead and import the namespace for this. And as long as we extend Eloquent's base model, we're now going to have a model which represents that user table. So let's go ahead and extend our model here, and let's just pull in the namespace for that. Okay, so now that we have this, we can kind of test this out over in controllers, over in home controller. If we go and do a dump on user find one, and we go ahead and pull in the namespace for user, we should see, and in this case we get a connection refused. That's probably because over in ENV we might use localhost here instead, depending on your setup, and we get null. So we don't have a user in here at the moment. I still have the database schema from the start of the course, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Let's get rid of this, and in this case we should see, and you'll probably see if you're following along, base table or view not found. So pretty much the state we started in. So let's go through just quickly the process of creating a new table in here and checking out how we would normally do this. So we would probably have an email with a varchar of 255. We would go ahead and duplicate this down and have a username probably. And again, that would be probably a similar setup. We would have some kind of password in here. We would have a first name maybe. And we'd probably have some kind of last name as well, and other information. Now what we're interested in is just making sure that this works, and we're going to add a little helper method so we can see this working. So let's just go ahead and enter literally anything in here, like so. So if we just head over to our model and create a little method in here, so maybe grabbing the user's name, what we're going to do is grab the user's first name, or if that doesn't exist, we're just going to grab their username. Now in this case, when I've created this record, we have an ID of 1. Over in our home controller, we have grabbing out a user ID of 1. Give that a refresh and we see that user instance. What we can now do is head over and use the name method, and I probably put user in there. Yeah, you probably noticed that. And we should get back my name just in there, or if that doesn't exist, a username. So that's just the kind of general setup. This is how I would normally set things up inside of a fresh project. But after all of that, we're going to head over and focus on installing and configuring Phinx to get our migrations working.